Hey all, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you so much for joining Hyderabad Power Platform User Group. And this is our July meetup. This time we have with us Senthamil Selvan, and he has been recently renewed as Microsoft MVP. Today he's going to talk about unlocking data security, strategies for effective encryption in Power Automate. And I personally like this session topic so much, and I'm excited to see this because it's about security. And to be honest, everybody everywhere is just concerned about security. We want to store a lot of data, but to keep it secure is another thing that we have to look after. So, thank you, Senthamil, first of all, for coming here, and secondly, for choosing this topic specifically because I think it will be very helpful for our attendees today.
Thank you, Ritika.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All
So
right,
let
so the floor is all yours. If you want to share your screen, I'll
yeah.
add it to the screen and you can continue.
Okay, let me share my screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you able to see my screen?
Yes, we
Okay.
can see your screen.
Okay. Welcome again to the Hyderabad Power Platform User Group. Another session of Power Platform sessions here. So today we're going to discuss more about unlocking the data security and strategies for the effective encryption in Power Automate. Let me go through the slides. Before I start the session, Ritika had given a brief introduction. This is just about myself. In case if you want to communicate with me or later, if you have any questions, probably you can reach me directly. So these are the channels which I'm in. Like I've been writing a blog about it, and also I'm in Twitter. I have few YouTube channel, so you can subscribe to it. And the discussion which I'm going to have, I've already discussed some basics about encryption and other stuff in my YouTube channel as well. It has a well-defined YouTube video which you can see here. You can also learn from there. MEP profile is just for the reference. I've been an MEP for 11 years now. Okay, so these are the small. This is the small agenda which I have for today. Basically, we just going to discuss the encryption in the Power Automate, and then we quickly dive down into how do we encrypt the data in the Power Automate using custom connector. It's not just the Power Automate; it's common to the whole Power Platform. And how do we create the custom connectors and how do we consume it? That's how the main agenda which we are focusing on. Later, I would just show you a demo or a piece of code which is already there to encrypt some of the data. You can reuse it. And I have a GitHub URL as well. I can share it. You can download the code and start using it readily. Okay, so basically for Power Automate to encrypt any data, there are few third-party components which are available already. But the problem is that in most of the enterprise scenarios, you are not allowed to consume a third-party component. Instead, you can create your own custom connectors to do the encryption. Security as such in Power Automate, there are several levels of security which you can do at the Power Automate level. We are not going through those security or the governance structure for in this session. Probably I can take another session on how does the whole environment kind of a security roles and permissions, how do you govern Power Automate, how do you manage your custom API, REST API. So those kind of information are broad. In this session, I want to focus mainly on the encryption alone because why? Because in my experience before on the encryption, I was working with one of the enterprise customer who are kind of providing an encryption data to the for the consumption. They already had REST API or Azure functions within their enterprise, and they encrypt certain URLs when they when an purchase order or through the Microsoft Dynamics uh, application. And these URLs are encrypted with their custom private key, and they have their own algorithm to encrypt. So when it comes to the Power Automate, I used to get the Power Automate URL, and this Power Automate is triggered based on the HTTP request. And once it is triggered, the URL which are encrypted, we need to decrypt it, and then finally it has to process the URL and send it back in a HTML format. That was the key scenario which I was into in the use case. When I was searching for the Power Automate to encrypt or decrypt the data using a custom algorithm with high encryption with a 256 key and a secret key with their own private key as well, I couldn't find much of the information on the connectors. Although there are third-party connectors which are already available, most of them were blocked in the organization. So they allow most of only the Microsoft-related connectors to be used within. So that's how I started digging into the custom connectors for encrypting the data. And these custom connectors are really best option for you to encrypt the whole content within, like it can be, it's basically a C sharp code which you're going to write it into your custom connectors and just execute based on the C sharp code which is already there. Why custom connectors? Some basics about the custom connectors. These are the three main points for custom connectors which you should know. Custom connectors basically allows you to connect your existing or write your own APIs within. So that is the main advantage of the custom connector, which are not available in the pre-built. So in my case, use case, I didn't find any of the good, especially selecting the algorithm on your own and having it as 256 based or a 128-bit encryption. So I could not find much of the existing one. So I started writing my own. So that's how it as a custom connector comes in. Second, you have a choice to make the API either private or public, and also it is completely customizable where you have a full control over your connectors. And finally, these custom connectors are basically a REST-based API. You can even invoke your existing Azure functions as one of the custom connectors and pass the authentication. And these authentications can be in a different form. And while adding the custom connector within your Power Automate, these connections can be customized as well. So these three are the main basic functionalities of the custom connectors and when to use it. So the first scenario would be more of like bidirectional data flow and a complex authentication mechanism which you have. Imagine in your enterprise, you have your existing data which are in Oracle or in SQL or in some other third-party system, but those system which supports REST API with custom authentication mechanism, you want to make use of it, then the custom connector will definitely fit in, and you can start invoking or consuming the data from your existing enterprise without adding any of the third-party custom connectors. And the custom connectors have actions and triggers. Later in my sample code, I would demonstrate on the actions. Triggers, it's also possible. It's more like a webhook, whether you can have an Azure hook somewhere inside in your Azure functions or in your app, and you can trigger those. These triggers can be triggered based on whatever the action which you are performing. Like for example, if you have a custom Oracle table, wherein when someone want to insert into a specific HR related table and you want to get it triggered, you can expose a webhook, and this trigger can be triggered, and manually you can control your data based on the trigger. That's more of a complex scenarios which you can do on the custom connector. Actions are nothing but the methods. Basically, actions are like get data, insert data, update data. So more of a CRUD operation which you can do. Also, you can process some of the data within the memory as an instance. In this case, encryption of data is more like a processing. It doesn't go read into any of the table or update any table. It just process on the memory. you can just process some of your data and then just return the processed data. So those kind of actions which you can do, that would be more like a API. So that would be exposed as an API with the post or the get method. You can specify the method type as well, put method, post method. So later I would demonstrate to you. Let's jump into the demo quickly without wasting time. Before that, any questions or any?
No, Senthamil, I don't see anything on the chat right now, but
Okay,
I'll let you know in case there are any questions.
okay, okay. So to do the custom connector, especially for the encryption, not just for the encryption, in a general about the custom connectors, you can straight go into the make.powerautomate.com into your environment. This is the home page of the environment. Usually, when you start doing the custom connector initially, you will not see the custom connectors on the left hand side. I have pinned the custom connector explicitly on my environment. Um, you can find out the custom connectors through more options here and then discover all. And inside the discover all, you would see the custom connectors here, action and the custom connectors here. And you can pin them to the left. So in my case, I pinned it already. If you don't find it on the left, so you can discover all and then find it here. So in this environment, this is my playground environment, mssgrade.dev. I already have 3 custom connectors which I played around. So more of like I did several YouTube videos on how to do the basic custom connectors, what has it been, how it has been used. You can watch step by step as well. I would give an idea on here as well. How do you do the custom connector? Basically, you can start a custom connector from different various ways. If you already have your Postman collection, you can start importing the Postman collection. Basically, it's a REST API, post method or a put method, depends on the method which you specify in the Postman collection. It will automatically expose your method and the operations. You can also import from GitHub, Azure services, blah, blah, blah. There are so many options to do. In this scenario, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to write my own C# code from the scratch to do a encryption. So I'm going to start with a blank connector. So whenever you start creating a custom connector, you'll have to think over it or plan it before. What are the operations or the actions which you want to have it within the custom connector? Custom connector, it is at the top level, meaning that you can name it such a way that it can be like a string utilities. Like for example, last time uh, I was stumbled upon string operations within the enterprise to do a comparison. Basically, for the Power Automate, there is a comparison for the string. You just say equal to, and then it will just give you. But I want to control how the string to be compared, especially when I want to compare with case sensitive, without case sensitive, and ignore space. So it can be more options. So I want to have a more control over the string comparison operation. At that time, I was creating my own utilities of string manipulation. So in that scenario, my custom connector in general would be like add-on utilities or string utilities. So under that string utilities, you can add more and more actions like compare string, add string. So all the operations which you want to do within for a string manipulation, you can add more and more actions within. So the custom connector at the top of the first step is to give a name. In this scenario, what I'm going to do is that these are more of a security utilities or something which is an add-on. So I'm just going to name it as set. Why? Because it is already there. Okay, I created. So once you create a blank custom connector, let me maximize the screen so that you would see more options. Okay. So whenever you create a new custom connector, the name would be at the top of the custom connector, and you have a choice to upload icon. Usually it's a PNG file. You can upload any of the PNG file as well, and the JPG file. It has mentioned less than 1 MB, so it becomes like a icon. Color background as well. These are primary, and you can specify the description. Description is the one which appears when you drag and drop your custom connector inside your Power Automate or Power Apps in wherever. Uh, this before encryption. Okay, and you have a choice to connect to the on-prem. Last time, one of the use case which I have is to connect my Oracle database to the local instance. So at that time, I have specified using the gateway. You can set up a gateway, connect to your organization on-premise databases or your API, and then start consuming that as well. It also supports that. Schema, it's always better to have HTTPS instead of HTTP. And the host name, in this scenario, there is no host name, or it is not a mandatory that I have a host name. So in this scenario, you can type any name as a host name. In my case, I just use name as great. It can be any, because this custom connector is going to just process or just going to encrypt, run inside the memory of its own instance. So I'm not going to have any of the input. And the base URL, again, base URL is nothing but this is the REST API call which would be formed within. Like for example, you can even segregate all your existing actions like under utilities, under security utilities, under string in utilities. So you can have your own base. So based on the base, you can keep adding more and more actions, and this will be used to segregate it properly. Second thing, as I mentioned you, there are several authentication mechanism for the custom connector you can use. In this scenario, especially for the encryption, there is no authentication, because whatever the text you're going to pass in, it's just going to encrypt, and the decrypt works in the same way. Whatever the encrypted text you pass in, it is going to decrypt and send it back. So there is no authentication mechanism. You can add basic authentication or API key. For that, you'll have to add an extra. Like for example, if it is by API key, you can use Azure to generate the API key and validate the API key which is being generated or being supplied, and you can process based on that mechanism. And again, OAuth2, if you want to have your own connection, if your server accepts kind of a multiple authentication, you'll have to do this authentication mechanism. In this case, it is a static or the C# processing code. We don't need authentication. So next step is the key step, wherein you specify the actions and the triggers. For the encryption and decryption, there are no triggers as such. There will be only actions. So I would add one action, which is kind of encrypt data, and description, encryption using algorithm. Operation ID is the unique ID. This can be the same as the summary. In my case, encrypt data. And this visibility is just for the UI, meaning that this operation, whether it has to appear in the advanced, later in the Power Automate, when you drag and drop, that is an option in the actions saying that you want to see more advanced operations. So it is just the UI one. Also, there is internal and important. Important meaning that this action is more important within this connector, and you have to call it before you call any of the other actions. Second most thing important is the request. So you can import the request from the sample. In my case, it is going to be a post method, and the URL, again, it doesn't matter what URL you supply, because it is a C# code which executes. So you can specify any URL. There is no header for me, and that's a body. Body meaning that what is the input you want to get in. So basically, this defines the input for the method. For the encryption, you need the encrypted the content which is to be encrypted, and the private key. You need to supply these two. These two are the primary two primary parameters which you can supply if you are using AES algorithm. So let me go back to basics before. Okay, this is the website which is an online website where you can encrypt and decrypt the data and then test it out, or you can even use to encrypt and copy paste, play around. So I used to test this before executing the Power Automate. There are several algorithms to do the encryption, as you should be knowing that. AES is one of the good encryption algorithm. It takes several parameters, or it takes its own options to do the encryption. So basically, how AES encryption works is that it has a kefir mode of encryption. Usually, CBC is the preferred mode, and PKCS. And if you want to note, uh, IV is one of the important thing to note on the AES encryption. Why? Because IV, it's optional, but it makes it very hard for the hacker to or someone to decrypt it if they want to do. So it is good better to provide an IV which would randomize your encryption encrypted text, which makes it very difficult for them to decrypt. And key size, usually 128 and 256. 256 the high bit encryption. So in case in your custom connector, if you want to get all these parameters, you can still do it. You can specify what is the mode of encryption you want. All these you can even get it in the parameter. That would make it still more control on your custom connector. And finally, the secret key. Secret key, again, this is a mandatory one which it which it uses to encrypt the data. If you specify 22 to 6 encryption mode, your secret key should have a specific length. So if it is 128, you'll have to have 128 bit encryption. Then you should have 16 characters. If it is 256, then you'll have to have a specific character. So if you see this, it has to abide by that rule, or else it will not encrypt. So, and this is the original text which I'm going to encrypt, which is encrypted here as well. So later when I'm using the same, this is universal. So meaning that no matter whatever the library which you use, like either use Java, JavaScript, or any programming language, this is universal, meaning that it has to encrypt based on the AES algorithm, use this mode, IV, and the secret key. So any library which you use, it has to encrypt and give you this encryption string. And no matter what library you are using, if I supply the encrypted text, assume that the algorithm is the same, key is the same, and the encryption level is the same, it should be able to decrypt. So it doesn't matter whether you are using within your Java application or your JavaScript or anywhere. So that's how we should check in. So usually what I do is that I try to encrypt the data in this website and try to decrypt in the Power Automate, which are completely different applications, but still it should be able to decrypt your information. So that's how it should work. Then your code is kind of safe. Okay. So coming back to the custom connectors. So for us, we have two parameters, which is to be the text, which is input text, and key, which are more important. You can get the IV as well, but IV I'm going to just hard code it so that it can make use of it for every. Okay. Oops. Okay, so it has to be a proper JSON and imported. So once you imported, these are the two parameters, and it will automatically add all those detail. And if you see here, this is the body. You go to edit, and you would see two parameters. So automatically it will convert the JSON into a UI format, which is easy for you to manage. And if you go to key, you can specify whether you want to make it mandatory format as a string, and then you can say whether this key is very mandatory here, and the type and the format. So it gives you a full control on the UI on your parameter. You can even supply a default value. In some cases, like if you are doing a string comparison and you have a parameter to say that I want to do it in a kind of case sensitive and case insensitive, by default it can be case sensitive. So those kind of a parameter you can specify. Similarly for text, it is mandatory again. I don't want to pass empty text, so it has to be mandatory, which is required. And again, this is again UI. This parameter you can have it in advanced or by default it can show, and the type also you can specify. Remember, when you change the type here, the JSON will change. Since I specified as a string in the JSON, it had by default taken it as a string. You have other types as well. Okay, so parameters are all set. A plugin, basically I just ignore this. This is a new plugin which comes into the screen. I have not played around yet, but for now we'll just ignore. Okay, so now this is the core part of the custom connector for the encryption. So what I have done in my previous use case in my code is that I literally reuse the .NET Core or the ASP.NET C Sharp code, which I was using it before for my website to generate the encryption. Basically, any C Sharp code which uses a .NET Core, you have a decent code to encrypt with the library, it should work. And here, this is like a developer playground. If you already have your code in Visual VS Code, you can copy paste here, and it pretty much works like a static class at the top. So if you see here, script base is the class which would be executed, which is an entry point for this code execution. And whenever this code is executed, it automatically comes into execute async. So you cannot skip this execute async, which is more like a C sharp code for the entry point. So, and then whatever the code which you are writing it here, which will start to execute. Remember that this is an asynchronous code. You'll have to be very careful in managing the data within asynchronous call. And again, there is a restriction on the number of lines of code which you can write. Basically, not just the number of line, it's a byte. So there is a restriction. You can see the restriction on the left. Your code should not be more than 1 MB, and your execution should not take more than 5 seconds, or else it will get timeout. Basically, they're going to spawn an instance within the Power Automate or within the custom connector. This is more like a microservices or Azure functions or some instance running just for this. So it will just execute and then return back. So you are going to be charged based on that execution, meaning that there is no direct charge, but this action is counted as one of the actions within your Power Automate. And based on the uh, activities or based on the intensity of the operation which you do, it is counted as the action within the Power Automate, and it is overall it is considered as actions in your Power Automate metrics. So this is a simple C sharp code. To enable it, you'll have to make it enable and make sure that you select your operation and you start writing the code here. Basically, what it does is it returns a response as content, but you have a control over what is the response you want to send. Example, you can send it as a JSON string if you are very familiar about the JSON. If you want to make it very, very simple that whatever it is encrypted, I want to just pass it as a string, still you can do it. So what I did in my C sharp code is, let me go back to C sharp code, which is already there. Okay, we cancel this. Okay, so this is the original code. Let me paste it in the Visual Studio Code for easy. Okay. Um, think it is you. Trying to find, make it more readable. Okay, let me move it here. Okay, hope this is visible to you guys. Let me view appearance. Zoom in, zoom in. Oops. Okay, made it a bit useful. Okay, so this is the original text or the code which you can see. I used it for the encryption. You can see here, this is a typical C Sharp code. You should know C Sharp very well, especially the .NET Core C Sharp. I've declared a static variable. I mentioned it before, the IV text. I'm just hard coding it so that every time I don't want to generate the IV text because it is an additional option for encryption. And this is the entry point. You can see here, execute async is the entry point. And everything related to the custom connector, you can get it through this dot context. This is basic. If you have experience with ASP.NET programming, this dot context is often used to identify the current context of the session or whatever the details you want to get. So basically, you need to get the operation ID. This one you'll have to do it on yourself. It doesn't know the execute async is just the entry point. Then you'll have to segregate what actions you want to perform, because I have selected the both actions in my. Uh, let me go back and then mention you that. So if you specify here, these two are the actions which are being there, and execute async will pass the operation ID. So the operation ID, you will have to specify it here. So this is nothing but the switch statement, which I check for the operation ID. If the encrypt text operation is being performed, then I just call this encrypt text method, which is being defined at the bottom. This is a typical C sharp program. And if you take the programming code, it is a normal cryptography algorithm, the cryptography library which is being used to encrypt the data. You can just ask to Copilot or ChatGPT to write me a encryption code to do AES with the 256 and blah blah blah, whatever in your ChatGPT or in your Copilot. Definitely, this whole code it can give it to you. Then you can slightly modify it to make it to work for you. That's how I did for my encryption. So I just asked Copilot to get .NET Core or ASP.NET C Sharp code to encrypt using AES with 256. It generated me a decent code. This code, basically this whatever within using. I copy pasted here and then changed it to have a parameters. The first parameter, again, these are the syntax you should use it to get the parameter. Remember, we pass the parameter as a JSON text, so you'll have to parse the JSON. These two is mandatory to read the parameter. Then within the parameter, this is the parameter name, and this is the private key which we got, and the algorithm, and you get that value. So here, what it does is it directly sends the string content. If you want to send it as a JSON content, you'll have to use the JSON content to form your own JSON and pass it, return it into your method or the action. Similarly, for decryption text, same logic. You read the text and then use the code, decrypt it, and then send it as a string response. So this is how it converts into. This is a simple C sharp encrypt and decrypt code, which is a universal code which people use it already. So you can reuse it within your Power Automate. So once this code is being performed, what you can do is that you can test the code. So while testing a code, you'll have to have your connection. So you can just say new connection. It will automatically create a connection for your custom connector. And to test a code, you'll have to pass your decrypt text. So I'm going to do the encrypt text. Either you can pass by the raw body, which is the JSON, or you can pass by the private key and the text to encrypt. So let's see, let's test this one the same. I'm going to use the same secret key. Private key is the same, and the text to encrypt is my name. So when you test the operation, it just has to return only the string, which is encrypted string. See here, this is the encrypted string. It is successful, and this encrypted string should match here, basically. So let me do the side-by-side compare. Response and this one, okay. So basically, this is the encrypted text, which you should get it in your encryption. And the algorithm and the logic are the same, and it should use, I think it is slightly different. Why? Because it is not, it is case sensitive. Let me check this. Okay, yeah. So now it matches within your Power Automate. This key is matching with this Power Automate. Let me, okay, so more or less it's the same. Okay, just for the assumption, just for your reference. Okay, so now encrypt text is working. Also similarly for decrypt, I can copy this. Let me go back to this operation, decrypt operation. Copy this encrypted, and the private key, I should know the private key, which is, so I'm going to use the same private key and the test operation. Okay, it has decrypted. So whatever the text which I specify, it has been decrypted. And this encryption, decryption, right now I have given a simple text to encrypt. You can also encrypt the whole of a text file. I have tested with a chunk of full text file to be encrypted around 1,000+ characters. It worked pretty well, uh, but you cannot read a Word document or PDF or whatever inside and then start to encrypt. For that, you have to use a separate code which is encrypting a file. So, in case if you are very keen on encrypting a file, text file definitely it works. I've tested it with my same logic. Basically, you need to read your text file using your Power Automate. If your text file is in OneDrive or in some other location, just open that file, read the content in the Power Automate action, then just pass as a string and it will encrypt and then just save it as a text file again. If it is other file format, PDF or Word document, you cannot use this approach. Probably you'll have to write another C# code to process a file encryption. Okay, that's about encryption. And finally, once it is working, everything is done. Just close this. And now you need to consume this connector within your Power Automate. So let me use my existing one for the time being. We are running out of time already. Let me, okay. So basically, this is the sample Power Automate which I created using the custom connector for encryption. It's the same. If you are much familiar with the Power Automate, you should have a trigger. In my case, it is a manual trigger. I'm just going to execute on my own. And I just drop my action. So maybe I'll just show you again. Uh, Whenever you try to add your custom connector, the left side screen is a bit weird. You cannot able to search with the operation name sometime. Why? Because when a custom connector is created, it takes a while, maybe 5-10 minutes to update your custom connector within their environment. So sometime when you search, it will not appear. The best thing which I do is that often immediately which is available, you just filter by the custom. If you see here the drop down here, you filter by the custom, then you will see all the custom connectors which you have created. This makes it much easier for you to filter again. Then you can drag and drop or just click on it. And again, With my experience, sometime if you update your custom connector, like changing the name or do some additional operation or actions or triggers, just wait for maybe 10-15 minutes to update those. Sometimes the update is not immediate, so you'll have to wait for a while to process and then update and get the actions. So in my case, I added the encryption. You see here automatically the parameters are already there. Private key, text to encrypt, which are all the parameters which are already there. So this is a new parameter, and the connections, you don't need any connection such as it will just create a connection for the custom connector alone. There is no authentication mechanism. And settings, these are pretty much the same standard settings. And you will see the options here. Like for example, if I just remove this, you can see here, this is the description. This description, nice description appears if you provide a valid description within your custom connector. Like this one, I have mentioned it specifically: private key, 32 character in length, AES 256 requires 32 into 8. So it gives you some information about why the key has to be 32 character, and it gives you more idea about. So those are the description which you specify in your custom connector, and you can encrypt it. And similarly for the decryption, the same parameter. What I'm doing is whatever the encrypted output from the previous method, I'm just passing it in here because it is just a plain text. So I'm passing it here. And finally, I'm just using it in a compose method just to see what is the value. Let me save this and test it. Done. Okay. Okay. It should be fast enough because this is a simple C sharp code. It will not take more than 1 or 2 seconds. You can see that seconds here. Even the decryption is like less than a second. You can see the output and the input. Let's see the output. This is the body output. Since I'm passing it as a normal response string, it is a plain text. If you want to pass it as a JSON, you can still pass it as a JSON, like what is the private key which is being passed and then encrypted value. So maybe you can form your own JSON. And the value is passed here, decrypted text, and it has decrypted to the same. And this compose is just to show what is the value which you get it from the decryption. So this is a simple option you can do for the Power Automate to encrypt and decrypt. This is one of my real use cases which I've been using it in my enterprise to encrypt a URL, especially when there is a common URL which has been passed from Dynamics. We have more Dynamics integration within our organization. So whenever the URL is passed out from Dynamics, it has its own parameter, which is a query string. So I don't want anyone to see the query string. So what we do is that we take all of the query string, encrypt it, and append it to the URL as a URL, and then just try to decrypt on the other side. Only we know the private key, so we could be able to decrypt. So even if someone in between gets to get the URL, so URL is kind of encrypted. So they'll have to decrypt to understand what is it inside the URL. Okay. So that's all about my code. I think I'm on time. Any questions or anything is there?
Thank you, Senthamil, for showing these demos because I think it is important to understand, like, if something is not available, you can build a control, sorry, custom connector for that, and then you will be able to use any API. So, first of all, thank you so much for showing that demo to our attendees. At this point, I do not see any questions on the chat, but since this is going to be live streamed on YouTube and the video is available after as well, usually our attendees they reach out directly to the speaker. So you might expect some questions in the coming days from our attendees.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, if you have anything you would like to share, like some quick tips and notes, please do that.
Um, Quick tips as such, when you create a custom connector, I mean, you'll have to really plan the custom connector before even start creating it. So as I mentioned before, make sure that the top level custom connector add it as kind of a utilities, because I made when I create first time when I create a custom connector, the naming which I used it made it very weird. So make sure that you segregate it properly so you can easily use it. And again, the other important thing about the custom connector is that by default, in your organization, especially in your environment, the enterprise will not allow you to create a connection for the custom connector. You can create a custom connector. I have not faced any issue in creating it, but when you start testing it, you cannot able to test it because of the company policy. So you will have to really get hold of the admin for the environment or the power platform, and you should ask them to enable for you to create a connection for the custom connector. So only then you can test it. So that is one of the important thing. Then after that you can consume it. Yeah. So these are the small things which I really faced it. Yeah, which would be much helpful.
Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing those tips, Senthamil. I think it will definitely help us if somebody is trying to learn the custom connectors, because I think it's the first step that's the most difficult. Once you get a hang of it, then it's relatively easier to adopt.
Hmm. Yeah, true.
Mhm. Okay, all right. So with that, that's all for today. Thank you so much again, Senthamil, for coming here today on a Saturday and presenting these cool demos for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for our attendees, thank you so much for joining. We'll meet next month again with a different set of topics. And in case in the meantime you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me or Yash. We'll meet next month, I guess. Yeah. Thank you so much, all.
Thank
Have a
you.
nice day.
Yeah.
Bye bye.